Good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another additional session of the certificate course in environmental sustainability. Today, we shall be dealing with many of the aspects about which we have already mentioned in our course. And two such major aspects that we are going to deal with today is one related to genetically modified organisms, and the second one is environmental impact assessments, the latest on that. So, today's session is indeed very important because it's going to deal with very contemporary issues, and these issues will be dealt with by two extremely talented scholars about whom we definitely hope we will be hearing a lot in future as well. So, without much further ado, I would like to welcome today's panel. It is my privilege to welcome Dr. Sindhupi Nair, the head of Regional Evaluation Center, Cochin. It is also my privilege to welcome to our esteemed panel Dr. V.T. Jalajakumari, Assistant Regional Director, IGNOR Regional Center, Cochin. As always, with her very gracious presence, we have today Dr. Prasida Unnikrishnan, Assistant Director, IGNOR Regional Center, Cochin. And apart from we regulars, we have two extremely talented and versatile scholars with us, both currently pursuing various avocations at the Indian Institute of Technology. On the one hand, we have Miss Parvati Satish, who is currently associated with IIT. Uh, may I know which IIT you are from?
IIT Gandhinagar. IIT Gandhinagar.
IIT Gandhinagar. Sorry for the mistake.
It's
And we also have Nandini Suresh from IIT Mumbai. So it is my pleasant privilege to mention a few of their attributes and achievements on this day, starting with Ms. Parvati Satish. She is currently associated with the Department of Biological Engineering, IIT Gandhinagar, as a project assistant. Earlier, she had the distinction of securing first rank at the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics, Banaras Hindu University. She also had been a topper in various other educational pursuits that she had throughout her career. And she has had a number of academic achievements in her career, including being a part of the Summer School 2018, organized by the School of Life Sciences, JNU. She had also worked in various other projects. She also had, in fact, presented papers at various venues. She also possesses substantial skills in the area of DNA amplification using real-time PCR, SDS page for protein characterization. Then she also has been working on the areas such as G banding, C banding, bacterial transformation, handling models related to organisms of various hues. Then she has also worked and acquired skills in the field of immunodiffusion diffusion methods. She also had been associated with the acquisition of skills in the field of complement fixation assay, and she has a wide range of experience in various issues related to molecular and genetic, molecular and human genetics, and she has distinct
There's some issues there.
important topic which will be great benefit to all our participants, all our students from across the world. Second, let me go to the profile of Ms. Nandini Suresh, who is currently doing her doctorate at the Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai. She had been the gold medal winner at the University of Pondicherry for MSc in economics. She was also the winner of the regional round of the RBI Policy Challenge. She also was a topper in class 12 and 11. She has also had the distinction of doing internships with very reputed institutions such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, Chennai Mathematical Institute, CSIR, and she has also attended national and international level workshops. She has also done projects on bank mergers in India. um, she has also been part of various assignments with PricewaterhouseCoopers and various other institutions. She has presented papers on a number of issue areas of substantial importance, such as food security, mapping of the trend of health expenditure, advent of VAT in UAE and its impact on Kerala. And she has also worked towards organizing various seminars, workshops, etc. And she has also participated in very important conferences and workshops organized by various institutions. Today, as mentioned before, she'll be presenting her views on a very important topic, which again will be of great benefit to all our learners and also to the general public. So, without much further ado or much further delay, let me welcome Ms. Parvati Satish to make her presentation on uh, the important topic, that is impact of genetically modified organisms on our environment. So the floor is all yours, Parvati. Please go ahead and make your presentation. Shall I
Thank
count
you.
your presentation, PPT,
Yeah,
Parvati?
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Is that visible now?
just a second. Yeah, now it's visible.
Okay. Uh, First of all, thank you, Rajesh sir, for such a wonderful introduction. And so today we are going to discuss about uh, how genetically modified organisms are very much important in today's scenario and how it impacts the environment, the the nature and all the organisms in our mother nature. So first of all, I would like to introduce to all of you what are actually genetically modified organisms. So we uh, call them GMOs for convenience. So I shall use the terminology GMOs from now. So it is any organism whose genetic material has been altered using any genetic engineering techniques. So we all know that we hear about biotechnology, and since the pandemic has happened, we learn about PCR and other techniques very often. So genetic engineering is something which is actually a very very relevant and advancing field of science, where scientists work on manipulating, or in some or the other way editing, the genetic content of organisms. We all have learned in our smaller classes what is a genetic material. It could be DNA, and every organism on this planet has got DNA. Maybe some organisms have RNA as their genetic material, especially in case of viruses. So DNA is nothing but, for those who don't actually recollect what DNA is, it is deoxyribonucleic acid, which is actually responsible for carrying forward all the genetic information of an organism from one generation to another, so that every species has its own behavior in this nature, physiologically and morphologically, socially, and how it interacts with its ecosystem, and how it interacts with the fellows of its own species, how its metabolism is happening. The entire life of an organism is completely dependent upon the genetic content of that organism. So, what is actually a genetically modified organism? So, in a GMO, using advanced techniques and tools, we manipulate or edit the biochemical structure of the DNA in a way that we need some particular kind of response in that organism. Say, for example, you buy a fish, you feel like, oh my god, this fish is very small, or maybe you want it in a bigger size. So, you can manipulate the gene for growth factor. There will be some gene responsible in that fish, which could be possibly affecting the growth of that fish. That could be producing some growth factor in the form of a protein in that fish. So what we do is we go into the cells of that fish, maybe any egg cell or something, and we edit it in a way that that particular gene is very active, hyperactive, which will eventually make that fish larger than what we see in nature. So this is just a mere example of, or I can say a very simple example of what is actually a genetically modified organism. So the basic principle for producing a GMO is adding a new genetic material, or sometimes there are certain cases where we remove certain genes because we don't want that particular um, feature to be expressed in that organism. So these are all our selfish manipulations of nature, and we define it in a very maybe what can we call it? Yeah, we define it in our own terms, and it's all about making the lives of human beings more luxurious or convenient and less difficult, we can say. Yeah, so this was actually done by Dr. Paul Berg in 1972. What he did was actually he did transform a bacteria by putting some genetic material of a virus into that bacteria, and that made that bacteria resistant to the infection causing virus. We know that viruses can affect us just how COVID does. There are viruses which can even affect or kill bacteria. So you can imagine how small these viruses are. So he was studying such kind of interactions between microorganisms, and Dr. Paul Berg could create recombinant DNA molecules having both bacterial genetic material and viral genetic material combined together, for which he was later given Nobel Prize in 1980. So he is considered to be mm, one of the pioneers in this field, and he is the father of genetic engineering. He is honored that way. And going forward, what is genetic material? So we had been talking about manipulating genetic material. So genetic material is, as I already mentioned, is either DNA or RNA, which is very much essential for the survival of any cell, we can say. It's not necessarily a complete organism which is having a DNA. A single cell unicellular organism like a bacteria can have a cell having a well defined genetic material inside it. We all have studied about prokaryotes and eukaryotes in our smaller classes. So, prokaryotes are those which do not have a well defined nuclear membrane and have their DNA scattered in their cell, whereas we are very complex, advanced organisms having our nuclear contents are nothing but the genetic material, our DNA very well closely packed inside the nucleus. Okay, so we are all eukaryotes, and smaller organisms like bacteria are uh, prokaryotes. All of us, right from a single virus is not completely considered to be a living organism because it cannot exist on its own without a host. But even though, right from a virus to human beings, or maybe an elephant or a blue whale, all of us have DNA, and our fate on this planet is decided by this DNA. So, manipulating that DNA is something really fascinating. So, decides how an organism will behave, how it will handle external stimuli, how it will metabolize its food, how it will produce something. We know there are hormones produced in our body, there are um, so many things produced in our body. We have insulin, which is, all of us are very familiar with insulin, which is a hormone. For production of enough amount of insulin, we need a particular gene in our body to be active and to be producing proteins. So if we have that insulin gene defective, that is a case where it leads to a type of diabetes. So these kind of problems, when they were identified, that's how scientists came to the conclusion that, or not a conclusion, maybe they had a question in their mind: what if these defective genes can be manipulated in a way that it can some or the other way help people in making their lives better, or having a less difficult life. So this is about the therapeutic aspect. But in today's world, I can tell you that the most genetically modified organisms are used in meeting the demand for food. Okay, so population of human beings is huge on this planet, and a on a normal level, the planet cannot support or provide that much resources so that we all will have food to eat 3 times a day. Nature cannot do that. Nature is not that efficient. So we got to be smarter in that way, that if a cow can produce, say for example, 5 or 6 liters of milk a day. I'm just giving a hypothetical example, okay? So, and we thought, what if we can make this cow produce 10 to 15 liters of milk a day? It will be something beneficial to us. So this is all about. Uh, it comes about what meeting the demands, and a demand for more and more resources, especially in the sector of nutrition. So, editing of genes is genetic engineering, as I've already mentioned. So, this is just just an example, or I'm just giving you an example of how this is done. So, this is actually a very complex process. It requires weeks to get a completely, weeks or maybe years to get a completely genetically transformed organism. If it is a bacteria, we can manipulate its DNA within 3 or 4 days. But when it comes to larger organisms like mammals, so many problems scientists will have to face. Like, we have to go through ethical concerns. It's not easy to manipulate the gene of an organism. It requires a lot of regulatory guidelines to be met. It requires so many papers to be sanctioned from the government side, and it still is a controversy because we are doing something very unnatural, and we don't know how exactly the outcome of this kind of an activity will be. So uh, I'll just give you a vague example of how this is done. So if I hope you can see my laser pointer. Yeah. So this is a bacterium with some kind of insect resistance gene. So say for example, there is an insect which always attacks an apple, and that makes the apple get spoiled very easily. And one fine day, a bacterium was found out having some secretions which could actually kill that particular insect. In that case, what scientists will do, they will go study the bacteria, and then they will identify some particular gene in this bacteria which is responsible for making that toxin which has the capability to kill that insect. So they'll find out the gene, which is that particular gene. So they'll take out that gene. All this is done in the lab, using so many techniques. I don't want to go into the depth of how it is done, but in some way we have techniques to isolate that one particular gene. PCR is definitely one technique which helps in that. So we take out that gene and we can incorporate that into the fruit seeds. So when that will grow up and then germinate and become a tree and then give fruits, they will be having these genes which are capable of producing toxins against those insects which could have been eaten the fruit. So what will happen is the insects will come, they will attempt to eat the fruit, but because of these toxins they will either die, and during a course of time the insects will completely stop coming to attack the fruit. This is just one um, example. And in crop production in agriculture, genetically modified crops are very, very, very prevalent these days. We know BT cotton, uh, BT brinjal, and all that, in which Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria, that bacterial toxin is incorporated into the cotton. No, I will talk about that later. Yeah. So such genes are incorporated into the desired crop so that insects are repelled away, or this will eventually lead to a better yield in agriculture. So that's how these are produced. So agrobacteriums, that is a particular strain of bacteria which are actually disease causing to plants. So they introduce some parts of their gene into the plant cells. This happens in nature very naturally. You have seen some tumor like structures, maybe some of you might have noticed some tumor like structures on plants. So that is actually caused by this bacterial infection. What do these notorious bacteria do? They put some genes of their own into the plant, which is eventually responsible for production of that tumor. Okay, so that is how nature has its own genetic engineer. That's a very good example of how this kind of activities are already prevalent in nature. It's just that we are taking advantages of such already existing uh, ecological relationships of organisms in the on the planet. Uh, so there are so many techniques. Like there is a very minute gun-like structure. I mean, gun-like tool which is used to uh, shoot the very tiny gene into the cells of the desired host organism. These are all done in microscopic scales. So many techniques are used to do that. to transfer a desired piece of gene or DNA into another organism to genetically modify that. So this is, I just included so many implications of genetic engineering. As I already mentioned, genetically modified crops. It is a very prevalent thing in today's world, like for resistance to pests, herbicides, or to harsh environmental conditions like higher temperature or very variable pH of the soil, and improved shelf life of fruits, like I just mentioned, to prevent the fruit or the plant product from being attacked by insects and other small pests or bacteria or anything, any organism which can decrease the shelf life of that plant product, and to also increase the nutritional value. So if you want to increase some vitamin, like for example vitamin A or B12, um, in a plant product, what you will do, you will just put the gene to produce that particular vitamin into that crop, cultivate it, you're getting fortified crops, right? So that's one way. And plants including algae, maize, and other plants have been genetically modified for use in producing fuel, like biofuel. These are certain biomolecules like lipid like protein like structures which are used as biofuels, but not very popular since the production takes a lot of, it's very costly compared to the fossil fuel. So maybe one day we'll have to switch to this because of the lack of enough fossil fuel available. So but still it's not that feasible at this stage. So transgenic plants, especially for research purposes, we manipulate, like if we want to study about Alzheimer's, we will um, introduce some mutation in the genes of the mice or rat or whatever model organism is being studied. Like I have been working on rat models and mice models of Parkinson's disease. So in those cases, what we do actually is we put some gene which can trigger the pathogenesis of Parkinson disease, or maybe we will remove certain genes which are responsible for some major functions in the brain. So all these can cause that disease in the rat or mice or whatever model organism we are using. Mostly rats and mice are used in research, in biological research. So then we can see how the organism is responding to various medications, or we can also study how the level of deterioration of neurons in the brain, or how much, what is the degree of severity of the symptoms. Is the rat walking properly, and after introducing the mutation or introducing the disease, how long it took for the animal to be completely mm, completely weak, or how long it took for the animal to show all the symptoms. So these are all very valuable clinical data, which we can extrapolate to clinical setups to assess the patient symptoms in a better way, and also to enhance the diagnosis. So all this will contribute to a better treatment strategy. So this is one use of genetically modified organism in research, especially in biomedical research. And this is something which I have done, or maybe I have seen, and I have been learning all this while. So I'm not really uh, genetically modified crops and all. This is all something we all come across on a daily basis without knowing that whatever we buy from the market is a genetically modified crop. Even I also don't know that. We don't think about all those while buying something from the market, right? So what I have seen or done myself is I have worked on bacterial models, I've worked on rat models, and also there is a fly model which also is also a genetically modified model which we very routinely use in genetic studies. That fruit fly which normally comes in our homes on fruits and all those, they are actually excellent um, model for studying so many human diseases. They actually, their genetic makeup is very much similar to ours. So they are scientifically they are called Drosophila melanogaster. Simply we can call them fruit fly. So fruit fly Parkinson's model have been created in many labs across the country, across the world. We have Alzheimer's model of flies, and we have so many different disease models. So we have also, yeah, see here we can study cancer behavior, how cancers are developing, different types of cancers can be studied in rats or mice or rabbits, and even bigger animals like sheep and pigs are also were also used in earlier times, but nowadays they are not much used. Nowadays mostly for tumor like studies mice is used mostly, uh, and rats are also used. So these are all genetically modified organisms. We are modifying them for our own research purpose, right? So that's a very huge um, that's why it's very ethically controversial, because we have seen movies where these kind of genetically engineered uh, organisms escape from the lab and it's creating such havoc in the entire area. Or look at the pandemic itself. There had been hypothesis saying that SARS-CoV-2 was leaked from some lab, even though nobody knows what is the truth behind that. But still, we know we have been seeing since last 2 years how bad it could be, right? So it is a very very risky thing we are doing, actually manipulating something uh, which is not completely in our control. That is actually genetic engineering, I would say, because we just know the tip of an iceberg. Human beings think that we know a lot, but um, that's not enough actually. Genetically modified organisms can behave in a very unpredictable manner, so that's always a risk factor in genetic engineering. So while talking about the applications, I was just talking about the applications only. These all this while these are just implications in a very capsule-like manner. I just, if you want, you can take screenshots. Um, yeah, just like I earlier said, here you can see insulin to treat diabetes can be, if we put the gene of insulin into a bacteria and culture a large amount of this bacteria in a bioreactor, you can get humongous amount of insulin, right? This is how actually insulin is produced, and that's how you get it in your pharmacies. So that's a very very much life saving. So yes, that genetically modified organisms definitely do have a lot of uh, benefits or advantages. At the same time, it comes with a lot of risk. So here you can see these vegetables all attacked by insects. So if we introduce this insect resistant genes into these vegetables, you can have very good healthy looking um, vegetables. So this will increase its market value. So aesthetically it's more appealing. So if we go for buying vegetables, we'll look for those which are looking good and healthy, right? So everyone will want such vegetables. This is more of a yeah, it's about more healthy uh, f- food we want to eat, or we need good looking vegetables. So it's all about the marketing also. So it's very important in producing edibles, like in the food industry, genetically modified organisms do play a very very significant role. So fortified matlab, it is like we need more of some health benefits, like omega 3 acids are told to be very good for your skin, very good for maintaining your cholesterol level and all that. So genetically modified pigs are used to produce lean meat with high levels of healthy omega 3 acids compared to the bad fat. So these are all kind of lifestyle betterment, we can say. And also, just like I already mentioned, using growth hormone genes, salmons are manipulated in a way that they grow much more quicker or faster than normally the 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 normal salmons do. So in the same way, milk production is also increased using genetically modified cows. So this is another example of genetically modified organism. So here it's a corn variety in which we need to incorporate a herbicide resistant um, feature in the corn. So the herbicide gene will be incorporated into the corn, and this will definitely help in the growth of that corn very much compared to the previous one. But the problem is the evolution of herbicide resistant weeds will require farmers to increase herbicide use. So there are good and bad to everything, right? So this is what is actually causing the bad environmental impact, which is actually what we are concerned about in today's talk. So, genetic engineering will produce some kind of herbicide resistant crop, right? So, for a long time, for a very very long time, yeah, they will work without any herbicide. They can manage on their own without any additional chemical herbicide being used on the agricultural land. But after a given period of time, what happens is the herbs or the weeds surrounding will develop resistance towards uh, these herbicide resistant corns, and then they will evolve to be very very bad. I mean, they'll be very very good survivors. And for tackling that problem, the farmers will use double the amount of herbicides which they actually would have used. So this is also a concern which is coming up these days, because for few years we used herbicide resistant crops, and now we are observing that there are weeds which are resistant to this herbicide. So the amount of herbicide we have to use will definitely increase. So another example of genetically modified organism is the vitamin A enriched rice. This is golden rice, which is very very easily available in the market, and most of us do have these fortified rice. So certain vitamin A precursors molecules called beta carotene. Beta carotene is a biomolecule from which vitamin A is produced normally in rice. So in places where vitamin A deficiency is seen more in people, this type of rice can be cultivated. So this beta carotene gene is normally not present in all kind of plants. So we put this beta carotene gene in the plant, from which the plant can then synthesize vitamin A. So this beta carotene molecule is a precursor for the entire biochemical synthesis pathway of vitamin A. So, beta carotene is a chemical that makes carrots orange and is turned into vitamin A inside the body. So, once we eat this beta carotene, our body can then synthesize vitamin A from this beta carotene in the rice. So, normally we know that colored food like mm, carrots and such foods are rich in vitamin A. It is because of this beta carotene, which is kind of yellowish or orangish in color. They are having this particular color. And this beta carotene fortified rice, it is called golden rice because it is actually yellow in color. So that's how that's another example of genetically modified organism. This is just a pictorial representation of how genetically modified salmon, how much bigger it is compared to a normal salmon. These both are at the same age, but this one is genetically modified and this one is a normal one. So, this much extra resource genetic engineering can provide to the human race because in a very limited time frame, and this is one implication of genetically modified organism. Yeah, I already said that omega 3 fatty acid enriched uh, pork is one genetically modified organism derived product. And in the same way, we know antibody therapy is there. Plasma therapy is one way of therapy which is through which many people recovered from COVID. So you get COVID, your body produces antibodies against COVID, I mean coronavirus, and your body get immune to coronavirus at least for some period of time. So people who survived coronavirus do have antibodies in their body against this coronavirus. So if we can produce those antibodies outside the body, or maybe in the body of some other organism in a very large amount, we cannot the amount of antibodies produced in our body during the course of an infection is very very minute. So we cannot extract it in on a market scale from a from our own bodies. So that's not practically possible. So there are manufacturers or companies, though those can produced a large amount of antibodies in sheep milk and all, so that they can extract it and use for antibody therapy. This has not been commercialized for COVID, but yeah, there are so many diseases for which antibody therapies do happen. And for also these kids though, that come for tests, right? Like for COVID itself, we have this home test kit, and what happens is actually they have certain proteins on it which can bind to the, that is actually COVID antibody coated on that kit, which reacts with the coronavirus antigen in our, I mean, the swab. So that antibody is there, which reacts with the antigen if present and gives the pink line. So the same happens with pregnancy test kits, and there are other test kits for dengue, malaria, and so many diseases. For all these test kits, they need antibodies against the particular disease causing organisms, markers like proteins of that virus or bacteria or whatever it is. So these antibodies are produced in bulk to produce these large amount of test kits. So this is all done on genetically modified organism. See, for example, mm, coronavirus test kit you buy, right? So you need a lot of COVID antibodies on the coated on that test kit, for which you will introduce some amount of the coronavirus proteins into some organism, and in that in the body of that organism there will be some immune reaction like a fever or something, just like uh, the entire coronavirus is not injected, some parts like the protein or something from the coronavirus is injected to the a genetically modified organism, or maybe that gene responsible for coding, I mean producing that protein of the coronavirus is put into the organism and it will produce that, or the antibody producing gene is put into the sheep or anything, and that will produce the antibodies. So that is how a large number of test kits and all are produced. So that's one application. So here another implication is, see, you can see an ear on the mice, right? So transgenic mice, what happens is the gene responsible for production of body hair is removed in this mice, okay, and then we introduce some genes into the mice which will help in production of nose, human nose, ears, lips and all abruptly on any part of their body. It's kind of cruel, but this happens, right? So what happens is these are used as prosthetics in patients who have survived acid attacks or maybe any kind of burn. For these are all used as prosthetics for them. So yeah, that's one application. So we have seen the applications of genetically modified organisms, and now let us talk about, and as I already mentioned, this is, we are doing something with a very minimal amount of knowledge we have. So there could be possibilities that you are putting a particular gene from one organism to another. You don't know how the other organism is going to respond to the gene which is completely foreign to it, right? So if we put a piece of gene into our body, who knows what kind of an animal the next generation of that particular species would become. There could be such, there are possibilities that such bizarre outcomes could possibly, I mean, come up. So we have seen sci-fi movies picturizing such effects, and it's nothing too far away from reality. Genetic engineering is really risky if you, I mean, in some way, such genetically engineered particles they come out of the laboratories, and if they get to interact with other um, natural, uh, naturally breeded wild organisms, and you don't know how the outcome would be. Like I already mentioned, we use these fruit fly models, right, in lab. So we make Parkinson's disease model. While using these Parkinson's disease model flies, after studying their behavior, we are not supposed to let them fly out, because we don't know if they fly out accidentally and they go out and they meet some normal fly. There are chances they'll meet. We cannot predict what kind of an offspring they'll make. So it is very, very strict in laboratories that we always sit in, while handling these flies or rats and mice. Yeah, we handle them in a much more enclosed spaces, and flies and all, we have to be very, very precautious with them, because we don't want them to fly away and go mate with a wild variety and bring up some bizarre uh, I mean, offspring, right? So we take care of it. We take at most care of it. We open the glass jars very, very carefully, and we never let them fly out. And after the experiments, it is mandatory that we discard all the flies in a tar like substance. It is not that we just throw away them in soil or just we just discard them like that. We first embed them in a tar like substance which is called morgan actually. um, that's how it's called in our lab. So in that tar like substance, it is made sure that this genetically modified organism will no way interact with any other naturally occurring piece of gene or DNA and become something else. We make sure that that kind of an interaction doesn't happen. So that's how even a genetically modified fly is discarded after experiments. It is, we make sure that we anesthetize them just by giving a few vapors of ether or something. They'll just faint immediately, and then we put them in the star like substance, and then we discard them. We never let them fly out of the lab. That's very important while dealing with genetically modified organisms. So like I already said, bacillus thuringiensis, it is a bacteria which produce insect killing toxin. So the insect killing toxin gene from the bacteria is taken, put it in the plant, and then we have a plant which is resistant to that insect. Right? So it is used for cotton actually. It is very commonly used, BT cotton, which is something very popular. So in those cases, we need insects for pollination, right? So there are undesirable effects like it kills bees, birds, beetles, and butterfly, which are actually necessary for the normal functioning of the ecosystem. They are also killed because of such kind of incorporation of insect killing genes or toxin producing genes into plants. So that's one harmful effect on plant. So while looking into many different, I mean, this is just I've just put all the points together, like increased herbicide use, which we already discussed in case of that corn, and super weeds. That's the same case. Like you make herbicide resistant varieties. After some time, they lose the herbicide resist. I mean, the other weeds become resistant to herbicide, and then what happens? They grow up like anything, and then you'll have to use double the amount of herbicide which you had been using earlier. And these are all like super pest contamination, loss of biodiversity, unpredictable interactions in nature or the host organism, which we already just discussed. So yeah, this is just a data uh, of a representation of data collected in Canada by Management and Regulatory Agency of Health Department of Canada. This is because of use of genetically modified herbicide tolerant crops. Herbicides had to be used more and more after every year, and this shows a clear increase in use of herbicides. So I think that that makes it more clear to you. And the same way we already talked about yeah, those weeds which are resistant to herbicides are called super weeds. So super weeds will develop every year. So we had been since last one century, we had been having such vigorous practices of agriculture. So till now, there are 30 species in all rice growing areas, rice weeds. This is just a random data. Okay. So yeah, so super weeds are those weeds which are resistant to even herbicides. Why this happens is, if anyway, if we are exposed to some kind of stress for a very long time, during the course of time we evolved to be resistant to that stress causing factor. The same way, plants also, the weeds also have this tendency to be resistant towards whatever is causing stress to them, and they evolve to be much more stronger. We use more herbicide, it will damage the soil, it will damage the small insects or birds or whatever other organism is residing in that area, and this is a vicious cycle. This will go on. right? Yeah, so the same way it can happen with the pests also. Pests also develop some kind of um, resistant towards this genetically modified insect resistant crops. So the Bt corn was produced. Okay, so insecticide earlier used was very high. Then came the Bt corn. So Bt corn was produced, and at a particular time, there it was observed that yeah, okay, insecticide uses are being reduced and all that. So but after a very very long time, what will happen is these uh, pests will also develop on a, it is of course it is predicted by so many studies that during a course of time these pests will also develop resistance towards such toxins produced by genetically modified, or I mean genetically modified crops, and then it will be even more difficult to manage that, right? So that is super pest. So contamination is when a genetically modified organism go interact with the wild variety and produced, I mean, there is mixing up of the genetically modified or engineered genetic material and the wild variety. When there is mixing up, that is some kind of a contamination in the gene pool of the nature. So that is something which won't be in our control if it goes really bad. So minor incidents have been reported in case of canola, flax, seeds, and wheat and pigs, and so many such organisms. Thankfully, till now, nothing disastrous happened. We believe so, but we don't know when it is going to turn upside down. And another consequence of using of genetically modified organisms is loss of biodiversity. So, biodiversity is something which is very much essential for the balanced existence of all the species or all the members of a given ecosystem. So, there is a genetically diverse population of any, say for example, this is a these are so many varieties of potatoes, for example, right? So uh, pea pin infestants are some pests which normally infect them. So among one or these two are actually the targets of this insect. So what happened is, according to our taste or preferences in the market, we found out that these two varieties are mostly in demand. So by genetic engineering, we produced all the varieties to be that way. And later, what can happen is why there is variety in this nature. Variety is for the purpose of increasing the chances of survival. When there are two different people facing the same situation, the response to the same situation will be different by two different people. One could be resistant, and the other could be susceptible, right? So the same goes with every variety of every organism on this planet. If there is any kind of stress, let that be a some pandemic like situation. See, this pandemic happened. There are variety of people who have different immune systems, right? Many people got COVID positive, but very few lost their lives. Why? Because we are all different from each other. So, if we were all the same and we were all susceptible to COVID 19 in a very severe way, our species would have been washed off. So the same happens when we produce only single variety of any species via genetic engineering. They become more susceptible to any kind of infection or any natural stress they would be subjected to in future. So it is important that there should be variety in nature to increase the chance of survival if anything wrong happens. So that is one problem caused by genetically modified crops. Loss of biodiversity. Diversity is lost, right? So, while coming to summing up all the points, genetically modified organisms can affect all the trophic levels. I hope you understand trophic level. What is a trophic level? You had been studying environmental science, so yeah, trophic levels are in a given ecosystem. We classify the organisms in different trophic levels according to their consumption and production. So the first trophic level, it is producers. Okay, that's plants, and primary consumers are the ones which feed on plants. And the next level, which is the third trophic level, is actually the secondary consumers, which is actually feeding on the primary consumers. And then goes the next level, which are secondary carnivores, which feed on primary carnivores, otherwise also called the secondary consumers. So this is how the trophic levels of an ecosystem goes. Like the ultimate consumers are predators like lions, tigers, and all that. So all of these, when died, are taken care of by decomposers. They need to be decomposed and their organic matter is taken back to soil, taken back to nature. So it is a complete system which is completely interdependent, existing in complete equilibrium, at least thought to be existing in complete equilibrium and balance. So this is their food chain. Okay, so this is how there should be a natural balance among each and every single organism on this planet. Let it be that be a virus or a bacteria in front of nature. No human is special, no lion is special. Each and every living cell is equally important. So, all of the single molecule or each and every single cell has its own contribution to maintain the balance in an ecosystem, right? So, if we are manipulating one small, I mean, and assume a building made of so many bricks, you take out one brick, you create a huge gap, and the strength of the entire structure is made, I mean, weak, right? It's made vulnerable. So exactly the same thing happens when you disrupt the entire food chain. So we are preventing the insects from attacking the crops. We are somewhere breaking the food chain, right? See, we are breaking the food chain. We are disrupting the very well organized trophic system. So on a long run, it is definitely causing so many problems like global warming, climate change, and so many such issues we are facing right now could be because for a very long time we have been disrupting such balances in nature. So what can we do to minimize this kind of negative consequences? What can we do? So it should be made, uh, policy implementation level should be more efficient. Like whatever food product is being marketed, there should be proper labels like what is used in that. Is any genetically modified organism or product or anything used in that particular mm, packet of food or any product, let it be a medicine or anything. So there are chances people could be even allergic to such things, right? So it can even there are reports that genetically modified food crops, like crops can interfere with the development of children, with the cognitive development of children. In there have been studies in that way. So we have to make sure that the traditional practices are always safer, right? We know we have kitchen garden practices, or maybe in earlier days our parents or grandparents, they are way more healthier than us because they used to rely on nature only. They never use genetically modified crops, or maybe genetically modified fortified vitamins, or they never had any need to take vitamin supplements or anything, because they were always loyal to nature, maybe. Yeah, that's the right word to use, I think. So living more attached to nature, trying to consume natural seasonal products as much as possible. So, to make seasonal products available all through the year across all the seasons, they are genetically modified. Otherwise, how a fruit like mango is available throughout the 12 months of a year? It is not possible until and unless they are genetically modified. So try to stick on to seasonal products, seasonal vegetables, seasonal fruits, and local fruits. Like, if you are living in a particular place on this planet, your genetics, your body, your entire system is aligned to your particular ecosystem, right? If you are from Kerala, your body is more happy, your genes are more happy when you eat rice, when you eat sambar, when you eat jackfruit. That's those kinds of food. That is what your body or your genes, there is memory in your genes from the time of your ancestors, that these were the foods your ancestors had been having. So that's how your genes are aligned. You are suddenly having some genetically modified fancy food, and maybe very imported food and all that. Your body will not be happy to metabolize. It will be something alien to your genes. Your genes don't know how to handle those things. So sticking to local seasonal food practices is very important. It will help with better immunity. It will help your genetic intelligence. You can see this word here. Genetic intelligence is something acquired by the biomolecules or your DNA from time immemorial, um, like for ages, for so many generations. Depending upon different civilizations, we are all evolved from our ancestors. So our genetic intelligence and genetic memory differ from each other. We are Our cultural background, all of that determines what kind of a lifestyle is best for us. So um, it's always better to stick to uh, traditional practices while coming to food and all that. Um, so, future perspectives. Even though I say that it is better to stick to old practices, but even maybe I also cannot do justice to that statement, because we live in such a fast forward world. Um, in some time, sooner or later, we'll all be woken up by Alexa, or our schedules would be decided by some artificially intelligent system or something like that. So it's not easy to maintain that balance. We are always curious about what we can do in future with such kind of technology. So I will just introduce you to some future perspectives. So I told you, genetic engineering gives us the possibility to make things, or make everything the way we want. So maybe in near future people might feel like, oh, I want my baby's nose to be this way, or my uh, baby to have straight hair or something. People might end up uh, approaching scientists or biotechnologists asking for genetic edits in a way that they can get the desirable or maybe the desired babies. So that kind of an approach will give you a designer baby, and this is something which actually exists. It's still not in practice, but it is there in theory. So another uh, concept of designer baby is also in IVF practice for ensuring the, especially when there is chance that your baby can have some or the other kind of genetic disorder. What happens is they go for IVF. They will have different mm, multiple zygotes, right? So one egg and sperm need to fuse to give a zygote from which the embryo will form. So multiple eggs are taken from the mother and sperms are taken from the father, and multiple fertilizations are done. So there will be maybe 10 or 15 fertilization done, and then they will screen those fertilized eggs or zygotes for their genetic makeup, and they will select one among them which they ensure that, okay, fine, this baby or the embryo which will grow from this cell will not have the predicted disease. This do happen when there are chances of genetic diseases to be inherited from parents, or I mean grandparents and all. So this kind of an approach is a possibility in near future. And gene therapy still not ethically popular, but experiments have been done. uh, Gene therapy, if you are having some kind of defect in any of your gene coding for say for example insulin gene, so you are having some bone marrow transplant or some stem cell therapy. Stem cell therapy is a very very popular therapy these days. So this is definitely one mm, perspective of or an aspect of genetic engineering. Uh, this is just stem cell therapy is done in a very basic level, but Nobel Prize of 2020 in medicine was for more and more innovations in gene therapy. So this will also come in no time, actually very soon. Especially in cases of cancers and all. Actually cancer is caused by some kind of mutations in your body's cells which will lead to uncontrolled division and growth of mass or tumors in any particular organ or any area of your body. So, if those cells which underwent some kind of mutation and they are dividing uncontrollably, if we can target their genes and stop them from dividing, yeah, a cure for cancer is there. It's not done that easily. It will take a lot of steps to be completed, but yes, that will be there in near future. So, uh, are humans actually smart? Yes, we are, but the genetic engineering tools are all bacterias or viruses, and integration of genetic material from viruses. Like, say, for example, in coronavirus itself, coronavirus cannot divide itself. A few number of viruses they do enter our body. They open up their RNA, which is the genetic material, they enter into our system. Okay, and they, in the infected cells, they get incorporated into our genetic materials, and then they divide, and more viruses are produced by our own cells. That is how viruses multiply in our body. So Actually, this genetic engineering technique is owned by the nature itself. It's humans were intelligent enough, or maybe we are intelligent enough to take advantage of such mysterious things in this nature, and innovate it in a way that it adds benefits to our lives. So that's how genetic engineering helps in many aspects of our lives. Also, putting it putting us at a very high risk of so many problems, like what will happen next. I think I could share some something new to all of you. And thank you so much. And if you have anything to ask, you may please ask.
Thank you, Parvati, for that very exhaustive and lengthy discussion on GMOs. Many things have been put to us which are quite new, and definitely there will be a vibrant discussion taking place at the end of this program. And we will have the lead discussions after the main presentations. Once both the main presentations are over. So now, and once again, thank you, Parvati, for that very in-depth and exhaustive presentation. Thank you once again. May I now request Nandini to make her presentation on Environment Impact Assessment 2020. So the floor is open to you, Nandini. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Shall I
Is my
mount the
screen
slide?
visible? Is the screen visible?
No, I'll. Okay, now it's visible. Now
Okay.
you're welcome to make the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this lecture. And myself, Nandini, and I'm doing my PhD in climate policy at IIT Mumbai, and I work on disaster risk financing. And today, in this course on environmental sustainability, we will be looking into the environmental impact assessment draft of 2020, which was very controversial during our lockdown time. And before we look into the EIA 2020, we need to know what EIA is, how it is related to environmental sustainability, the process, and the history of it in India. And then we will proceed to the current draft and its provisions and implications. And as we know, every anthropogenic activity has some impact on the environment. More often, it might be harmful to the environment than benign. And however, mankind, as it is developed today, cannot live without taking up these activities for us food needs, basically food security and other wants. So, consequently, there is a need to harmonize between the developmental activities with the environmental concerns. So, EIA is one of the tools available with the planners to achieve this uh, take on between development and environment. So, it identifies the environmental risk, lessens the conflict by promoting communities' participation, and minimizes adverse environmental effects, inform decision makers, and help to lay the base for environmental sound project. Thus, it can be said to be as identified as the most important instrument for facilitating sustainability. And the United Nations Environment Program has defined this EIA as an examination, analysis, and assessment of the planned activities with a view to ensure environmentally sound and sustainable development. So, coming to the process of EIA, the stages of EIA process generally depends and vary based on the requirements of the countries. And however, most EIA process have a common structure whose application is a basic standard of good practice. So, in India, it is up to the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change to show the guidelines, and they have prepared the guidelines along with questionnaires and checklists for different sectors like industry, mining, thermal, river valley projects, highways, roads, all most of the like railways projects, harbors, airport, communication, what not. Like most of the infrastructure are covered by the guidelines from the ministry. So some of the critical issues they focus on the guidelines include whether the local environment could cope up with the additional waste and pollution that the project will produce, or sometimes the question might be, will the project's location conflict with the nearby land use, or will they preclude the later developments in the surrounding areas, or sometimes it can be, can the project operate safely without any serious risk of accidents or long-term health hazards, and how, or means how is the project affect the economic activities that are based on the natural resources. So these are the basic questions in the questionnaires developed by the Ministry of Finance. And coming to the stages of EIA, the first stage is screening, which is done to see whether a project requires environmental clearance as per the statutory notifications. So it is basically based upon three things. One is the scale of investment, second is the type of development, and third is the location of the development. And the second stage is scoping, and it is one of the most important stage, and it's a process of detailing the terms of reference of EIA, and it must be done by a consultant in consultation with the project proponent and guidance. For example, it is done by Impact Assessment Agency in India, and the ministry has also published guidelines for different sectors which outline the significant issues to be addressed in the EIA studies. So when I say ministry, it is Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, who's in charge of the EIA proceedings in India. And here, the quantifiable impacts of the EIA are to be assessed on the basis of like magnitude, its prevalence, its frequency, and duration, and non-quantifiable things such as the aesthetic values or recreational values. The significance is basically determined through this socio-economic criteria. And coming to the third stage, this baseline data actually describes the data collection describes the existing the environmental status of the identified study area. Then they do the site specific primary data collection, which is monitored for identified parameters and are supplemented by secondary data if available. And the fourth stage is the impact predictions, which is the way of mapping the environmental consequences of the significant aspects of the projects and its alternatives. So environmental impact, as we know, actually you cannot predict it with absolute certainty. There is more reasons to consider than all the factors, possible factors, and take all possible precautions for reducing the degree of uncertainty. For example, right now the climate change issues are in peak, where we discuss what can happen at any time. Anything can happen at any time in the current scenario. And here for EIA, so you cannot say that this is going to happen at this point of time. So everything is under uncertainty, and you have to measure the uncertainty to make sure that nothing goes out of road. Like if the infrastructure is constructed, or if this is happening, and if something related to climate change happens, what will be happening to that infrastructure? You have to consider all those factors, that is the impact on air, impact on noise, impact on water, flora, fauna, land, the biodiversity, health aspects, and socio-economic factors. These all factors need to be considered when you see the prediction factors for it. And also for every project, we have to assess the alternatives. They need to be identified, and environmental or attributes have to be compared along with that. So when you select the alternatives, you have to look into where the location of the project is and what are the processing technology has it. And there should be also an option for like no project option. So it can be either no project or the process, I mean, alternative options available, or the current project itself. You cannot go without that no project option. And then the alternatives are ranked for selection of the best environmental option for optimum economic benefits to the community at large. And once the alternatives have been reviewed, a mitigation plan should be drawn upon for the selected options, and is then supplemented with an environmental management plan to guide the proponents towards the environmental improvements. And next is one of the most important stage of EIA, which is the public hearing. Law requires that the public must be informed and consulted on the proposed development after the completion of the EIA report. And anyone likely to be affected by the proposed project is entitled to have access to the executive summary of EIA. That is, the report should be published to them as well. So the affected communities or the persons may include the local residents, the local association, the environmental groups active in the area, and any other persons located in the project sites or the sites of displacement. So they are given an opportunity to make either oral or written suggestions to the State Pollution Control Board. And so before 1997, this wasn't legalized. That is, the public hearing concept wasn't legalized in India. So before that, anyone could, the public options were not available. And since 1997, the public hearing process has been conducted as a mandatory step of environmental clearance for most projects and activities. And if you see the EIA notification of 2006, it contains very less about the entire public hearing process. So it has even added a provision which make it possible to completely forego the public hearing process if the situation is not conducive for conducting hearing as felt by the local administration. And basically, this provision in the Act of 2016, the notification 2016, has been misused to further limit the role of public in the entire process. And there have been several cases in the past that have shown that public hearing process has failed to meet its objective of effectively involving people in the clearance process. For example, the T-Star Low Dam project, both 3 and 4, the Sedu Samudram Ship Canal project, the Subansri hydroelectric project, and many more where the public's involvement has been criticized. And the next stage is the environmental management plan. And here it is prepared by the Impact Assessment Authority after all the above provisions they have been compiled with. And then the stage of decision making is involved. That is, it involves the consultation between project proponents, that is, uh, proponents, and then the Impact Assessment Authority. And the decision on environmental clearance is arrived at though through several steps, including the evaluation of EIA and the EMP, that is the Environmental Management Plan. And the last stage is monitoring the clearance condition. And in this stage, it is done during both the construction and operation phases of a project. And this is not only to ensure that the commitments made are compiled with, but also to observe whether the predictions made in the EIA report were correct or not. So, if the impacts exceed the predicted levels, then the corrective actions are taken. And monitoring will enable the regulatory agency to review the validity of predictions and the conditions of implementation of the environmental management plan. So, coming to the history of EIA in India, the assessment of projects for environmental impacts, though not in this exact manner as EIA, it was dated decades back. So, it was first in 1975 in the guidelines issued by the Central Water Commission. It provided for conducting investigation regarding major irrigation and hydroelectric projects. And then in 1976-77, the actual EIA process was started by the Planning Commission when they asked the Department of Science and Technology to examine the river valley projects from an environmental angle. This was subsequently extended to cover those projects which required approval of the Public Investment Board. And these were administrative decision and they actually lacked the legislative support. So on 27th of Jan 1994, the Ministry of Environment Forest, they notified a mandatory EIA rule under Rule 5 of the Environmental Protection Act of 1986 for 29 designated projects. And this is the principal piece of legislation governing environmental impact assessment in India. And the notification made it obligatory to prepare and then to submit the EIA as well as the EMP and the project report to the impact assessment agency, and was then required to consult a multidisciplinary committee of experts. So The EIA provision was hence made mandatory requirement under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986 with basically four objectives, that is predict the environmental impact of the project, find ways and means to reduce adverse impact, shape the projects to suit the local environment, and present the predictions and option to the decision makers. So then, right now, the currently applicable EIA notification was introduced by the ministry on 14th of September 2006, and comments were sent by several groups and organizations in the same way as of 2020 draft. And since the objective of the EIA notifications 2006 was to address the limitations in the old notification, various modifications have then been incorporated. And the EIA 2006 actually is the recommendations, is an outcome of the recommendations basically made by the Govindarajan committee. And it was constituted to examine the procedures for investment approvals and project implementation. And it found that that the environmental clearances causes maximum delays to projects, and recommended that some of the cumbersome procedures be modified. And consultation on the draft notification were but only held with representatives from industries and central government agencies. So this has the perspective that this notification has more or less the perceptions of the corporate side rather than the general public side. Now coming to the draft EIA 2022, I mean 2020, which actually will replace the 2006 notification. It was introduced on March 23, 2020 by the, right now it is the Union Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Earlier it was, when the 2006 notification was there, this was only the Ministry of Environment and Forest. But since the importance of climate change has increased, it is right now the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And it aimed to bring about several changes to the environmental governance in the country. And the notification is intended to promote transparency and streamline compliance, as it integrates numerous notification, amendments, office orders, circulars, codes, and tribunal directions since the last EIA notification in 2006, which is actually right now in force. And Union Minister Prakash Javadekar stated that the reason for the draft's notification on EIA 2020 was to consolidate all the 55 amendments and 230 office memoranda issued since 2006. So it's a very big document. Whatever happened between 2006 and 2020 is this many amendments and this many memorandums. They want to compile it into one single document. So the main provisions made in the new draft include, firstly, the categorization of projects and reduced scrutiny. So currently all the projects are divided into three categories, that is A, B1, B2, uh, and based on the potential social and environmental impacts. So category A actually faces the maximum scrutiny, and it is because they are likely to have more significant adverse environmental impacts that are sensitive, diverse, and unprecedented. So these impacts may affect an area broader than the sites or facilities subject to the physical work. So in India, in category A, projects like mining projects, which actually has more than 100 hectares of mining lease area, then river valley projects producing greater than 75 megawatts hydroelectric power generation. Similarly, thermal projects producing more than 500 megawatts, and all the nuclear power projects and petroleum refining industries project, petrochemical industries projects, this all comes under category A. And for category B1, it's include like mining projects of minor minerals with more than 5 hectares or less than or equal to 100 hectares of mining lease area. And for major minerals with less than or equal to 100 hectares of mining lease area, and river valley projects producing less than 75 megawatts and more than 25 megawatts, this hydroelectric power generation, and thermal power projects producing like around 500, between more than, I mean, between 500 megawatts and less than 500 megawatts. So as per the draft, projects in certain sectors are recategorized from A to B1 or B2, such as the hydro river valley projects. And the second provision in the draft include by classifying several projects into A, B1, and B2. A host of projects are, as I said, exempted from the public scrutiny. So, category B2 projects, they do not require mandatory environmental clearance. So, unlike the A category industries and B1 category industries or projects, B2 doesn't require the environmental clearance at all. So the project under this exempted categories basically include around set of 40 industries in the new proposed draft, which says should be excluded from the EC, which are like offshore and onshore oil, gas, and shale exploration, and hydroelectric projects up to 25 megawatt, irrigation projects between 2,000 and 10,000 hectares of command area, and small and medium cement plants, acids such as like acids other than phosphoric or ammonia, like and sulfuric acid, and MSMEs where in dye intermediates, bulk drugs, synthetic rubbers, medium-sized paint units, and all inland waterway projects and expansion or widening of highways between 25 kilometers and 100 kilometers with defined parameters. So in this includes roads that cut through forests and dredging of major rivers. Also, there are aerial ropeways in ecologically sensitive areas, and also specified building construction and area development projects, which is built up to an area of around 150,000 square meters. So, this many projects are cleared from the environment clearance certificates. They don't require it anymore. And the under the current EIA rule, if you see, the notice period for public hearing is 30 days and to be completed in 45 days. So, as I said in the process, public hearing is one of the most important, step in EIA process. So, however, the new draft has proposed to reduce the notice period for public hearing from 30 days to 20 days and the process from 45 days to 40 days. So, the ministry has claimed that it will be in tunes with the times. That is, there is a growth of internet and smartphone. So, with respect to the time, so the procedures can be reduced, the number of days can be reduced, but as we know, most of these projects are either done in rural areas where the accessibility of internet and smartphones are very, very less. So we can't say it has been in tunes with the times. So the new draft also proposed that the projects having implications for national defense and security or having strategic consultation will be determined by the central government, and they are exempted from public hearing. So additionally, all linear projects like pipeline and highways in border areas, which falls within the 100 kilometers aerial distance from the LAC, that is the line of actual control, are also exempted from public hearing. So this is actually in reference to the military clash happened in 2020 and 2019 with the Chinese troops and Indian troops and Chinese troops in the Ladakh region. So the improvement in infrastructure development along the border areas actually is to avoid the growing security challenge as that's because of this has come into greater focus. And there is another thing of in the provision where the current rule actually allows complaints from public. However, the recent draft excludes the reporting of violations and non-complaints by the by the public completely. So instead, the government will take cognizance of reports only from the violator promoter, the government authority, or the appraisal committee, or regulatory authority, including assessment of damages and remedial measures. So the general public cannot report any violation. That is the correct right now what the draft has proposed. And in addition, the post facto complaints proposed implies that once the projects get approved by the concerned authority, the proponent projects are required to adhere to certain rules which are laid down in the EIA, like to ensure that no further environmental damage take place. And there are several cases where the proponent projects have substantially failed to comply with the rules. For example, the National Green Tribunal imposed fines on non-compliance with the environmental conditions on Jindal Power Limited and Coal India Southeastern Coalfields in March 2020. Then there was a report by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, that is a CAG report on environmental clearance and post clearance monitoring, which cited several shortcomings in following the conditions of the environmental clearance. And this included basically a lot of things, which some of them are non-obtaining of permission from the competent authority for cutting trees. Then there is no separate head of account and embarking of funds from the like EMP, that is the Environmental Management Plan. Then there was irregular use of groundwater, change of scope of work after obtaining the EC. Then if there is no construction of rainwater harvesting structures and residential facilities for workers. So then irregularities in relief and rehabilitation, and violation in the handling of hazard waste materials, and many shortfalls in the development of green belt, and many more. So this was in the CAG's report on environmental clearance and post clearance monitoring. What are the issues the companies or the industries faces to comply with the what post clearance monitoring. And the new draft EIA also proposed the submission of compliance report annually, where it was in 2006 notification, it was to be submitted every 6 months. That is twice a year you have to submit it. Now the proposed draft says that it can be done in 1 year. And also the submission of the complaints report will be solely prepared by the project proponents themselves. uh, that is one other proposal made by the EIA draft. So another major proposal in the draft of 2020 is granting post facto clearance, where a project has been operating without environmental clearance can be regularized or allowed to apply for clearance. So the judiciary in one of the recent cases, as in the case of Almabic Pharmaceutical versus Rohit Prajapati in the recent April 2020, said that environmental law cannot contest the notion of an exposed facto clearance. And also, the projects can apply for regularization post facto, subject to if they have remediation and resource augmentation plan, which is equivalent to either 1.5 times or 2 times the damaged assessed and economic benefits derived. And firms who are found violating the terms of their establishment, if they must get a clearance, however, will have to pay a penalty. So that was the provisions in the new draft of 2020. So, however, coming to the implications of this draft, it actually differs from perception. So, if you are a local general public, you have a different perception. If you are an industrial person, you will be welcoming the draft. So, it differs from point to point. So if you see, the first point is in the public participation. So as I said, it is wrong from the side of a general public. But if you see from the industrial side, it will have a positive side, positive view from the industrial people, because once the number of days are reduced, it will be much faster for them to start their project. So that is one point of view. So the reduced notice period, as I said, from 30 days to 20 days will only make it difficult to study the draft EA report, more so when it is not even widely available or provided in the regional language. So this people, most of the local public can't understand, might not understand their English or what other official language. So they need it in regional language to understand what are the provisions provided. And moreover, the reduction of time would particularly pose a problem in the areas where information is not easily accessible, or areas in which people are not that aware of the process itself. So the 2020 draft also say no information on strategic projects which shall be placed in the public domain. So you won't get any information about the strategic projects in the websites of like ministry. And this might actually open a window for clearance of any project without having to explain why. So somebody can actually categorize this as a strategic project, and you will not get any information about this. So that can be one of the negative side of this strategic project wala proposal. And Next is the environmental experts, after the proposal was issued, are of the view that allowing for a longer period, such as like 1 year, is a long time for filing the compliance report. And this might actually give an opportunity to the project proponents to hide disastrous consequences, which could go unnoticed. So earlier it was twice a year. So every time when you file a compliance report, they'll look into the report and see what is happening. So in 6 months, every 6 months, they will be monitoring the consequences of the projects. So once it is one whole year, it that means the time gap is a very big, that the monitoring of it won't be that efficient. And as I said, the things in the related to environment is very uncertain, and you cannot actually go with the prediction that this is going to happen at this point of time, this will happen this in this next week. So though the means forecasting abilities in India are much better, but you can't say it every time. And in addition to that, the submission of the complaints report by solely prepared by the project proponents themselves, without oversight or any review from any of the higher authority, may actually lead to inadequate and inaccurate information submitted on the project. And one of the effective tool to strengthen the monitoring and compliance system is allowing the affected community to participate in the monitoring activities. But if it is just prepared by the project proponents, then the information is might be inaccurate because they wanted the benefit for it. So it should actually have to include the local communities and the local residents, or whomever knows with the place should actually be in the participate in the compliance and monitoring system. And in July 2020, in a recent verdict by the Justice Adarsh K. Goyal, who is the then NGT, that is the National Green Tribunal's chairperson, observed that the mechanism for monitoring environmental norms was inadequate, and then hence asked the ministry to monitor EC clearance condition on periodical basis. That is, he asked them to do it at least once in a quarter. So that means 4 times a year, rather than the proposal. In the proposal, it was annually. So the justice has, the NGT has asked them to do it 4 times. So you understood, no, how much is the importance of monitoring the environmental concerns than what the proposal has said. And many have also argued that the post facto clearance of the project is likely to encourage industry to commence operations without bothering clearance, and might eventually, as they know, they might get eventually paying the fines. They know that they will be paying the fines. So this might open the floodgate of violations, and that is one thing. And so now let us look into some of the case studies in India and see what would have happened if the proposal in the draft will be implemented. So I can't say one of the real case studies because the proposal is still in paper, and there is no case studies where the proposal, the provisions in the proposal has actually been implemented. So we can take some of the past case studies and see what would have happened. So the one of the famous project is the Polavaram project, dam project in the northern part of Andhra Pradesh. It has a straddling portions in the adjoining states of Chhattisgarh and Orissa, and the project was actually planned in the pre-independence time, but then it was revived in 1982, and the project was finally given green signal in 2002 by then the state government. So under the Environmental Protection Act 1986, as we know, all major projects in the sector such as the hydroelectric, mega power, mining must get an environmental clearance because they comes under the category A. So uh, which is the category where you have to get environmental clearance. And environmental clearance for this project was actually granted in October 2005. However, the EIA report was prepared way back in 1985. The project was revived in 1982, and the EIA report was actually published in within 3 years of 1985. However, the project was stalled till 2002. because the report stated that about 150,000 people are expected to be displaced from 226 villages. And since the population has grown considerably, and the data used by the committee, executive committee of the EIA report made available regarding the number of villages and population to be displaced also, it doesn't tally with the current number and was very far from the ground realities. So some experts stated that the present DAA report does not appear to be comprehensive, and it contains inadequate or misleading data, and the authenticity of the report was questioned and was content to be put through a thorough scrutiny. So the project was opposed basically on the grounds of inadequate EIA, and there was no public hearing conducted in the states of Orissa and Chhattisgarh, even though around the 3,000 families were to be affected by the proposed construction of the dam. And during the hearing, both the state contended that the environmental clearance was granted by ministry without considering the opinions of the both states, that is Orissa and Chhattisgarh, though they were affected. And the court crushed the environmental clearance granted by the ministry to the Polavaram multi-purpose project, and it was concluded that the clearance given by the Union Environment Ministry was done without giving any adequate hearing to the people who were likely to be displaced, and hence it was considered unacceptable and improper. However, if you see the new draft of 2020 was implemented, then it allows limited time for public consultation, and this project would have come up without getting environmental clearance, and it would have been devastating upon the states of Orissa and Chhattisgarh. It's one of the pre-projects. However, the project is still under construction, and it is going on in Andhra. It's one of the famous project in the Andhra state. So next is this news you might have noticed. This happened during May 7th of 2020, where this gross negligence by the LG Polymers Private Limited in the management of their chemical plant in Vizag, which led to gas leak that killed around 12 people and hospitalized around 585 people. So the reasons were the lapse in managing the styrene monomer gas in the plant, and non-adherence to safety protocols, lack of timely emergency response measures and plans in place resulted in the accident, which caused a lot of devastation for the livestock and the vegetation around the area. This can be considered a minor to the Bhopal gas tragedy, one of the incident which were famous incident in India. So if you see, when the report was made again, seeing what happened, the Andhra government, state government employees, so that this entire entire plan was running without clearance for the past 2 decades. So the provisions for post facto clearance in the new draft allows industry to violate EIA norms first and then seek a clean cheat afterwards, which is actually contrary to the rule of law according to the Supreme Court. So earlier, a one-time MNC protocol was developed in 2017 for projects that violated the rules under EIA 2006, and they were to be remedied through either compensations or penalties. And this LG Polymers was one among the violators. So incidents such as this actually will likely increase in frequency if post facto clearance becomes a commonplace. And while the preparation of EIA is just a starting point, this exercise is meaningless without diligent monitoring and compliance with the mitigation measures. So the ecosystems often responds to external changes after a time lag, and continuous monitoring is necessary to capture the tipping point. So at the time when violations, so for example, this case, the gas leak in Vizag, as well as the oil field incident in Bagjan during the 2020, this incidents like this have become increasingly frequent. So relaxing the complaints report from twice a year to once a year is, it seems really regressive. So that is one of the other case study. So now coming to the other one. So the new environment impact assessment draft, if approved, might actually give many dams and hydroelectric projects to be constructed, which could actually cause catastrophic impact, as many projects, this dams and hydroelectric projects, would escape the environmental clearance due to the proposed amendments. So, many reports from NGOs and other environmental groups estimated that about 900 hectares of forest would submerge with the 240 dams proposed for hydroelectric generation as well as drinking water purpose across the country. So the ecological impact of submerging this forest will remain unassessed. And the list of 240 dams which has been identified, out of which so some work has already started, while others are still waiting the approval. But if this proposed draft of EA notification is implemented, then this approvals would no longer be needed. This is because the small hydroelectric power projects that just comprises of dams generating electricity up to 25 watts. So according to the draft, this comes under the B2 category, which do not require environmental clearance at all. So the EIA 2020 draft may encourage the proponents to show on paper that the bigger the hydroelectric projects, bigger hydroelectric projects, they are the cluster of the small ones, so that each of them could be considered as an individual project and then could escape the environmental scrutiny altogether. So, in such a scenario, the cumulative loss to the environment would be very high. And there are examples, right now, there are examples from the single dams built on Netravati, a river Netravati. So, there is Perla, which produces around 24.75 megawatt. In with Shamburi project of 24.550 megawatt. And there are similarly other projects on Krishna River, where that is Moneshwar small hydro project and Basavana. So in actual terms, that this projects could be considered as a single one. Like this, in altogether, it will be around 50 megawatt. So they can be considered as a single project, but which requires environmental, social, and legal scrutiny and then further assessment. So, in order to escape this scrutiny, they have been considered as two and then constructed. And as we know, building a dam actually causes the disruption of rivers' natural water flow. The river is fragmented, thus disturbing the habitat of both fishes and fauna, which becomes absent due to the lack of water or depth required for fish to move. So this small hydro projects, though it is said to be, set as a clean source of energy, so, and the development of infrastructure like roads and deforestation caused by it actually damages the environment. And also, a small hydro projects on a big river may look like a small impact. However, the same size project on a smaller river will have devastating effects. So these are some of the examples of what would happen if the new EIA draft is implemented. And coming to the aftermath of the proposed draft, like it was proposed on March 23rd of 2020. So after that, this many time has passed. The initial draft was made available for public comments for 2 months, first of all, but because of the furore of ill timing created, because it was published right before the lockdown, the world's largest lockdown. The comment period then was extended till August 11, 2020. So, some of the major criticisms were about the delineation of the procedure for projects to obtain the ex post facto environmental clearance, provisions for several categories of projects to bypass the public consultation. And however, despite the restrictions on public movements and people struggle to ensure their economic security during the 2020 lockdown, it attracted over 2 million comments, most asking to retract the draft. And during this time, petitions were filed in like filed in most of the high courts, demanding either translations of the report and more time for public comments on the draft, like extend to be extended more than 2 months. And the Delhi High Court directed the ministry to publish it in regional languages in June 2020. And one of the reasons that the ministry gave for the new draft was that changes made to the notification in the last years need to be compiled as a single document. As I said, there were around 55 amendments and 230 official memorandums. So they said this need to be compiled into one. And the Indian government has, as reported, has taken the comments received on the law pertaining to the environmental clearances seriously. So in September 2020, the ministry asked the CSIR, National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, that is NERI, to analyze the comments received on the draft EIA 2020. And in October 2020, the PMO office asked for a presentation on the comments received, and it appears that the government is paying heeds to the public inputs. A compilation of the amendments and orders issued by the ministry between March 2020 and now suggests that the public opinions is a matter of concern for this government. And the NERI, in its report of February 2021, identified 8 aspects of the draft law which were found to be fraught with problems. These are like the definitions, the project categorization, the preparation of EIA report, the public consultation, the validity of the environmental clearance, monitoring part, the dealing with violations, that is the post fact approvals, and the exemptions granted to the project. So we have already discussed these implications in the earlier slides. And the NERI report, as mandated, provides a glimpse of the problems in the proposed law through a quantitative analysis, but it has actually missed out a lot. For instance, many submissions had highlighted inherent problem with the appraisal process and suggested a complete overhaul of the EIA procedure in India. So far, the CSA NERI as reports remains the only step taken by the ministry towards engaging with the observations and comments from the public. And in alone 2020, the current EIA notification of 2006 was actually changed 33 times through 24 official orders and 9 amendments. And in fact, the pace of change has increased in September, October 2020, the very period when the government exhibited an interest in the public comments. And 26 out of the 33 changes has been passed since September 2020. And out of the 33, uh, 7 were made on the pretest of the pandemic, and included an extension for of terms of the central and state expert appraisal panels and authorities. And it also had the extension of validity of existing environmental permission of projects and exemption to the pharmaceutical sectors. This is like beside pharmaceutics, the sectors which were granted relaxation. Pharmaceuticals basically because of the COVID thing. And the sector's granted relaxations included the thermal power plants, manufacturing, mining of coals, minerals, and ordinary earth core linear projects. And all these changes actually were made ostensibly to facilitate the economic recovery after the slump that was a compound result of demonetization, the poor implementation of GST, and also the nationwide wide lockdown announced the during the COVID time. So that are the aftermath of the proposed draft. Coming to the summarize, what does means what angle we have to take this new draft. We know that the EIA 2006 notification was not a sufficient condition for protecting the environment, and several provisions in the latest draft it actually seem to scale in favor of easing the norm for doing business. So in 2019, the ease of doing business report by the World Bank by the World Bank, India's actually risen its rank from 142 in 2014 to 63rd in 2019. And however, if you take the index on environmental performance, it rank has steadily declined from 141 in 2016 to 168 out of the 180 countries. However, we are like, it is sure that the government has assured that it will strive to strike a balance between environmental and development concerns, because the there is always a debate between what is happening with environment and what is happening with development, because this does it says that it doesn't goes hand by hand. Concept of environment protection and development doesn't go hand by hand, but it can happen. It can happen if the proper measures and steps have been considered. Then there can be a balanced manner where the prospects of all the stakeholders are considered, like the industry, the local community. Everyone can be satisfied if the proper measures have been taken. And these are the some of the readings for your reference, and that is it. Thank you. We are open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nandini, for that very exhaustive presentation. You have highlighted many issues which can lead to wider discussion on this very important draft. Thank you once again for making that presentation and making us aware of many aspects with relation to this particular EIA draft. May I now request my colleagues, Dr. Prasita and Dr. Sindhu P. Nair, in that order, to lead the discussion on the presentations made so far. Starting with you, Prasita, madam.
Sir, am I audible to you, sir?
Yeah, you are audible, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Parvati and Radhika, for your wonderful presentation. I must say it was excellent and very nice to hear from Parvati and both of them, young scholars, I must say. And uh, starting with Parvati, she has very nicely explained about the genetically modified organisms, and in fact, she very simplistically presented as well, saying that it's a manipulated gene. And she also explained about the genetic material, which is in fact controlling and developing and maintaining, which is responsible for the maintenance of the organization. Very nicely, you have explained all these things, Parvati. And one more thing which I really liked about your presentation is you have presented it with various examples, which were very nicely explained by you. Especially, you explained about the impact of genetically modified organism on our daily lives and how it impacts us. In fact, you explained the various processes as well, like the how it will affect the transgenic plants, the genetically modified crops, the microbes, the mammals, and you also talked about the futuristic part as well, like the designer babies also, which we will be having in future. So my just one thought which had come to my mind is while going through your presentation is that can you just throw some light also about the policy aspects of GMOs in India? And when you compare with this policy aspects of GMO in India to the other developed countries, what are your thoughts about the policy issues of the same? Just a thought, maybe you can delve on it. And another thing about the other presentation made by Miss Nandini Suresh, and very nicely explained about the EIA 2020 provisions and implications. I suppose I wrongly spelled your name earlier, Nandini. I'm really sorry about that. And your presentation was really excellent, Nandini, and you have very nicely explained the provisions and implications of EIA 2020, and the way you explained it with respect to the case studies which you highlighted, especially the recent disaster which took place in Vizag. That was also very nicely explained by you. You also very nicely dealt with the lacunas in the EIA 2020 and which need to be pondered upon as a public also. so that we can put in our comments also for the draft EIA 2020. But a thought which came again to my mind with respect to your presentation is how the EIA process has in fact contributed enough to the protection of our environment. You explained the EIA process as well. Has it contributed enough to the protection of our environment, and how it has dealt with environmental sustainability as well? So, if you could throw some light on the same, I would be grateful. Otherwise, both of you, excellent presentation, and congratulations to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasida ma'am, for the appreciation, and also thank you so much for the question. Uh, Let me.
Parvati, can we have the answers at the end? Because there are
Okay, yeah, sure,
a
sure.
couple of questions from the viewers also. So we'll
Yeah,
just
sure.
note down the questions. You'll have the
Okay,
answers at
thank
the
you.
end.
I will, I
From
will.
there.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, sure.
Uh, Sindhu, madam?
Yes, sir. So overall, let me just say very briefly about both the presentations, and then move on to the second presentation, which I've been asked to do. I think we had very learned, very informed, very exhaustive presentations by very two young, talented researchers, experts, definitely experts in your own right. We got a lot to learn from both of you. Hearty congratulations, and we are happy to have you both adding on knowledge to our students of the course also. uh, Parvati, your presentation gave a lot of insights to us about the GMO, because we always try to look at the positive side of the GMOs, but you definitely opened eyes to that aspect of the GMO, which has to be. And definitely, I liked your last finishing point about balancing the ecosystem. Beautifully said, and very nice to have your presentation. Now, let me move on to the second paper, for which I'll have to just put in my views and summarizing your paper also. I think that is by Nandini Suresh. She has elaborately dealt about the EIA, because EIA is a very, very important aspect on any topic with regard to environment, sustainability, and development. We cannot just, we cannot just ignore this aspect of assessing. And we know since the earlier days, this was hardly there in any development projects. But as you took us through the basics of EIA, what EIA stands for, and how the history of it, right from the CWC or the Central Water Commission, where it was not so pronounced, or so not so much in a very vivid form as it is now. You've given us the entire trail of it in a very beautiful manner. And you have also explained to us the provisions of the EIA 2020, and we could understand that about what are the provisions and how it is actually categorizing projects into A, B1, and B2, and also the aspects that you have highlighted with regard to the public participation. That was one very important point, because till then we are without the legislative and the administrative aspect, the legislative aspect coming in, and then the public participation. That is very much educative for us, and also about the implications. Very importantly, the implications that you mentioned about public participation, and then the post clearance compliance and the post facto approval, and all that. So, just my one view on, or maybe a thought only. I do not know if it could be framed into a question, because with a brief stint of working in hydroelectric projects, very brief, but yet just to say that, when hydroelectric projects and things were being designed, one thing is given, that projects are required for development. So there's no way that we can say no to it. But then, as you also mentioned about striking the balance between environment and development, I was just wanted to share the point that when I worked long back in the water resources institution, I remember, my senior researchers used to say that, when when they arrive at the location for a hydroelectric project, they look at multiple sites, and then they actually come down to that particular option where it is trying to be minimized. But of course, those days it was not so elaborate. But then I remember them telling that it is about choosing the option among the alternatives which is going to have least kind of in least kind of interference, or having some kind of intervention in the environment. That is what they used to say. But then one startling point for me from your presentation is that this particular EIA has gone through so many amendments, notifications, which
Yes.
itself is a very positive aspect that, environmental, activism, not, I will not say activism, but then the people's participation and the contribution is very positive. And overall, I would like to say I don't have any specific question, but overall, it was very comprehensive presentation from you. And maybe you could throw light on how we can trade off between these two, if it's possible, at least in some sectors. And with regard to Parvati's, this thing really delighted to know about designer babies and all. So that is otherwise your presentation was also very educative and informative. That's all from my side, sir. We could go on further. Thank you.
Thank you, Sindhu madam, and thank you, Prasida ma'am. The analysis that both of you have made about the presentations is very apt, and definitely it does throw light on the kernel of their presentation. Because it is so easy very often to lose sight of the main points of any presentation. But since you have, both of you have so beautifully encapsulated what was so relevant in those presentations, it has thrown essential light on what needs to be taken forth from their presentation for further action in the respective fields. Jalja madam, any thoughts on both these presentations?
So many thoughts, sir. Better to share everything along with the vote of thanks, no?
Oh,
Okay.
sure, madam. No problem.
Yeah.
No
That
issues.
time I can do.
I have a couple of points to make with regard to both the presentations. First, coming to Parvati's presentation. Of course, I know that you are an expert in this particular field, but as a layman, what comes to my mind is that there, and this goes something, I think, somewhat parallelly with what Prasida Madam has mentioned just a few moments back. The policy structure, the kind of regulations that we have in this country, do you think they are adequate enough to, in fact, ensure that GMOs do not actually fall into wrong hands? Because there are a lot of issues with regard to GMOs which come forth and on. I know that there have been several amendments, there have been several new laws which have come in place, but uh, what, which exact law would you like to have to ensure that GMOs really do not fall into wrong hands and they do not create the kind of problems that many nations have faced in the past? That is as far as Parvati's presentation is concerned. Second, coming to Nandini's presentation, again, a very beautiful presentation. One thing that I would like to ask you is with regard to two or three basic policy inputs that you would like to have in the new EAA when it comes out as an act. What would be those two or three essential policy inputs that you would like to have in the new act when it comes out? Because there are a lot of issues which have been dealt with under the draft. And
Yes.
drafts, as you know, they are a mode of discussion basically. There is a lot of there are a lot of points going forth and on. So, in fact, if you remove the chaff from this particular draft, there may be two or three major points which you would like to have in the act. So, which all would be those points? And secondly, economic development, as we all know, requires a kind of compromise between the kind of environmental objectives that most people profess and the developmental needs. Do you think developing countries are today in a position to make that kind of a trade-off? Do they have that kind of a wherewithal with themselves that they can actually do a kind of trade-off in this particular field? So these are two questions which came to my mind, and there is one question from the audience which I would like to share in particular. Can GMOs be the solution for food problems of the future, or would they be the problem for the future? This, I think, is directed to Parvati. So maybe you can take that when you answer the other questions as well. And of course, there are various other comments which have come, but I think most essential has been already taken into consideration. So your answers, please, and your responses, basically. Starting with Parvati.
Okay. So thank you for all the questions and all the appreciation. First of all, coming to Prasida ma'am's question, she had been asking about the guidelines of regarding GMOs within our country as well as abroad. So, as far as I know, because I haven't been into the depth of guidelines and regulations of GMOs handled in whichever labs I have even worked, because all the administration side is either handled by the project investigator or the institute guidelines. We are instructed to handle the GMOs in a particular way, like I mentioned. We have to discard the sacrificed bodies of the organisms, be that be a little fly or even a rat or a mice, in a very efficient manner, that it doesn't come in contact directly with any kind of biological in the environment. We handle it in a way that the genetic material is completely destructed, and then only the organic matter is exposed to the external environment. That is one way we take precaution while handling genetically modified organism. And while talking about the guidelines, the ultimate guidelines are to be always sanctioned by FDA, Food and Drug Authority, which is situated in US. And while talking about guidelines and other uh, concerns in our country, not every institute, research institute, is allowed to use genetically modified organisms. There are very few institutes in our country like JNU or BHU where I could get a chance to work, where they have central animal facility. So there are only few institutes in our country also which have that biosafety level. So, while dealing with biomedical research, there are different levels of biosafety which are sanctioned in different institutes according to the facilities available there. So, mostly biosafety level 2 is the most common level of biosafety which is present in normally most of the educational research institutes. And while talking about the most efficient safety level, which is designated as biosafety level 4, that is only present in uh, I- if right to my knowledge, National Institute of Virology, Pune, and Serum Institute of India, and then also in one animal facility which is situated, I don't exactly remember where it is. I don't think there are more than three BSL level 4 labs in our country. So, this is how they make sure that genetically modified organisms are handled in a safe space and they don't get misused. And so many government regulations and paperworks need to be done. I mean, there are so many hurdles before you get into a PhD program or you get your project sanctioned, which involves the requirement of so many organisms. For an average life science PhD who's working on a mice or rat for through the entire period of 5 or 6 years, he or she will have to handle around 200 to 300 mice or rat. So that's not a small number. It will be it will go through so many screening sessions, and we have to give proper reports of where and when and how we use those mice. Then only we'll get the new ones issued. So it goes through a long process. Maybe that's why people like us, who are working in life sciences, take 7 to 8 years to complete their PhDs. So, and coming to other question, that's also somewhat similar. Rajesh sir asked how to ensure that they don't fall into wrong hands. So this is also uh, checked upon in a similar way by the government, and like organizations like DST, which is Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Human Resource Development, also DBT, Department of Biotechnology, takes a very good care of the guidelines regarding GMOs in our country. So these are the main three organizations which are which having an authority to have a check on the institutes having animal facilities. And there was another question from the audience side. Can GMOs be a solutions for the food problem in future, or will GMOs themselves will be a problem? So actually, this is an interesting question, and it's all about how we handle them. You can never say that GMOs are 100% safe. They will never be safe. Any kind of manipulative technologies, matlab, there is a usage in Hindi called chhed. Whatever chhed you do with the nature, it will definitely come at some cost of risk, right? So yeah, so I think we can never ensure that genetically modified organisms will be 100% safe. We cannot assume that we even know 1% about the molecular interactions that might happen if two unknown entities face each other in a different host organism, like gene from a human being and gene from a weird bacteria which has never encountered each other in the course of evolution of millions of years. And if we are putting them together in the same system and expecting nothing wrong to happen, I think that's not practically possible. So it's all about taking chance and risk in genetic engineering, and try to contain whatever disaster that can happen. Like if at all any problem arises, these VSL levels are constructed in a way that any biomolecule, say for example a virus or a bacteria, do not escape the lab facility. So that's the only way we can ensure that it is not exposed to external environment. But yes, contaminations and cross reactions do happen in many labs. It's all about how they manage it and how they don't let it go outside. And so yeah, so GMOs always come with a great risk. It can be a problem as well as solution to problems at the same time.
Thank you, Parvati. Thank you for that response. Prasida ma'am
Thank
and
you.
Sindhu madam, you are happy with the response that Parvati has provided?
Thank you, Parvati. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Now, coming over to Nandini, your responses, please.
Yes, sir. First of all, thanks for all the comments and the appreciations. So, first question was ma'am's questions about the environmental standards, how the process is based upon the environmental responsibility and sustainability. So, before coming to that, when the draft was initiated in 2020 of March, we did a field study on this about what is the opinions from the multiple stakeholders. And in that, I talked to people from NGOs and as well as people from the industrial sectors about their view on what is the actual impact of the new draft. So one of the questions was this, which ma'am asked, the question was, what does the as I remember, what does the draft TIA 2020 mean for India's environment, and how does it affect the existing environmental standards? So that was one of the questions which we formulated. And in this, I can say from different perceptions, because as we talk to multiple stakeholders, so they have different viewpoints. So from the industrial viewpoint, they are like they say that it doesn't affect the environment at all. It isn't about the environment. It is actually about the process, EIA process, how it is actually happening. Only the steps they have, they say that the steps have only changed. So that is from the industrial perspective. So now coming to the NGO people which we whom we talk to, So what they says is that this clearance wala thing, one is that thing. So many projects would only require the environmental permissions, which will go without any detailed assessment or any public hearings. And the draft is in extremely lenient towards the expansion and modernization of projects that can actually use more advanced technologies or raw materials. And for instance, what they say is this: all projects can enhance their capacity by either 10 percentage without any appraisals, and just an online application is required. That is what the people from the public side says. And the draft also proposed that the regulators take the project's word for these accepts. And the draft sets several limits on the quality of the project appraisals and provides for several standards, terms of reference for almost all projects, and increases the validity of the approval period. That is one of the point they say. So this are all examples of lowering the standards of environmental regulations of the projects, and this is not the direction we must be going in at all, given this climate change is a harsh reality which is around us. So we have to go with the environment as a major major planner in the future, for the future. Whenever we plan for future, either for development or for growth of the economy, we should go with environment. That is one of the point I have to make for ma'am's question. So we should not compromise the environmental sustainability for any of the process. That is according to my viewpoint. That is one of the thing. So, and coming to Sindhu ma'am's question, it wasn't question, right? It was basically a comment. So uh, you have more experience in the field study. What I understood from whatever I read is this hydroelectric projects, uh, mm, uh, they escape the scrutiny, public scrutiny, by dividing the projects as smaller ones, because when you categorize them as B2 projects, they can easily escape the scrutiny. So that is actually affecting the vegetation as well as the flora and fauna, as well as the biodiversity of the area around the dams, which they will be constructed on. So that is what two of the examples which I gave. That is one in the Netravati River and one in the Krishna River. So though they have go through all this EIA procedures properly, but when there are numerous number of dams in the same river, it might affect the environmental sustainability around the area. So that is one of the key points. And as Rajesh sir asked, whether uh, the questions were what are my add-ons to the this question of EIA draft. So, as I could say, India has been a very active participant of the UN Conference on Human Environmental Development Stock in the 1972 UN Conference, as well as the Rio Summit of 1992, the United Nations Framework, UNFCCC, as well as the Paris Climate Accord, which has significantly strengthened its environmental governance. So, after pledging this alliance to this famous international environment instruments, and the EIA, which has proposed in the current draft, actually, which it weakens the environmental standards as of now. So it is in a the country as it is in a position of cognitive dissonance, as that is what I could say. So it's conforming a non-conformity to the pledges made at the international negotiations and agreements, which will weaken India's stance as a global leader in environmental governance and climate politics. That is one of the point I have to make. The rest of the things, like as I mentioned, the public hearing thing, as well as the post facto clearance. These are the two most important things which I felt should actually go back prior to the 2006 thing, because even in 2006 notification, the public hearing was compromised, as well as the clearance for some of the projects were also compromised. So what was happening in 1994 should come back, because as already mentioned by these all the prominent environmentalists as well as functionaries, climate change is a harsh reality upon us. So we have to accept the fact that environment should not be compromised. And next question was the trade-off between development and environment. This is a long debate, especially if you see the case. As an economist, what I could say is the compromise between development and environment, it differs from country to country, as you asked. Differs for developing country, differs for developed country, and it also differs for lower developing country. And as you asked, it is for developing countries. Unfortunately, it is not possible for the developing countries to maximize both its environmental protections as well as the economic development. So each country must make a decision about how the two goals should be balanced and how to achieve that balance. So it mostly depends upon the people as well as the governing authority to decide what should they give as priority, or even if the priority is given, how to bring upon the other factor in the same path. So that are the 2 points I have to make. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you both of you for those comments. I feel the inputs that you have provided in your basic presentation has been supplemented very well with your responses which you have given right now. Thank you for that. Now, may I request Jalja Madam for a vote of thanks. And as she was mentioning earlier, she would also be presenting her views on the presentations made in a more elaborate manner during her vote of thanks. So, over to you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Actually, I was not for asking questions. That is why I was telling that, because really I was enjoying the beauty of the integration of two disciplines. This is what actually the interdisciplinary approach of our course, I think. At first, I was thinking, that is why I was asking sir a question that how much is the time allotted for both of them separately, I was thinking. But now I think it was a good decision, and it was an apt decision that chance was given for both of them to present on the same day by giving them liberty. Both the presentations were so exhaustive, so comprehensive. And sometimes we can say that one is in the environmental and developmental aspects in a social science way, and the other one was in a biological science way. So the question came from one of the viewers, other than that of the panel, was focusing on that, I think. Are we satisfied with the developments already came in the genetically modified organisms, and what about the future? That, and how the policies and the decisions over the EIA 2020 is supporting the environmental factors of India. These were the main things, I think, came out from our thoughts. So beautifully, both of them were presenting their topics and their subject expertise. That was also very noticeable, I think. And I think the future will definitely approach scientifically for the maintaining of compromise, means maintaining the balance between development and economic aspects, environmental aspects. Development is always based on economic thoughts than that of environmental protection or environmental degradation, isn't it? So in our course also, we were focusing on that. That's why this type of introductions and further readings we are always bringing uh, again and again. And seriously, this type of presentations makes our students seriously uh, to make them to think about how to approach in future. So when Nandini was telling about the, I was focusing on some of the, because when in 2020 the new EIA policy was declared, and when it came, I at that time itself I was noticing that even our press people were not making that much discussion, because it was very important. One thing was that the public cannot interfere in that matters. Public cannot report and interfere. It is very big, dangerous thing, I think. It was opening actually a public, means it was opening a platform for um, interference of the public. Really, sometimes if we go in deep, that may arise a lot of political discussions. I think that may be one of the reason for keeping it in a silence. It should not be like that. Another thing, the sole preparation of the project report is from the part of the project proponents. That's also a dangerous issue, I think. So the public participation and public comment and analysis from the part of the public is that is the key, means key aspect when a policy is framing. When we are framing a policy, this is the key thing, how to be kept in mind in a democratic system. So this is a big question before us, which is very serious also. That is one of my comments. And then about Parvati's topic, I was really I was wonderfully hearing a lot of things, and I was remembering, sir, when we were visiting your JNU campus once, Sindhu Ma'am and you, one dog came out from the biotechnology lab. I was remembering that, sir, immediately in a cautious way, you were warning me, go this side. You don't know how what will be the impact of the dogs if you are touching on, like that you were telling. I didn't understand at that time what you were killing. Now today I was bringing that point in my mind and what will be the impact of this genetically modified creatures doing outside. And like that one point is there, even if the presenter was also telling that it is hypothetical, but how this COVID was spreading over the world. Because sometimes, maybe because of our absent-mindedness, sometimes maybe deliberate, whatever it may be. So how much important all these things? But always environmental, economic aspects are discussed among the public in a broad manner. But these biological science aspects and this lab experiences are not at all discussed among the public. So I think uh, this session was giving a platform for the public, our listeners and our learners to think in a divergent way, from the two expert youngsters, the promises of the future. I think definitely that will encourage our course and that will encourage our learning style, and definitely that will encourage the uh, generation of new policies for the development of India in biological science as well as in social science. So, sir, can I say the word of thanks also along with this? We can, yeah.
Sure, madam. Please go ahead.
Yes, yes. So, once again, for the panel and for all the learners of this certificate course in environmental science, from my heart of heart, for all the panel members, we say our congratulations and our heartfelt thanks to the two youngsters, the two young scholars, for bringing us a beautiful, intellectually supported evening. And we are expecting more and more contributions and thoughts from your side to nourish and support and to supplement our course. Once again, for on behalf of all, let us say gratitude to both of you. Thank you all.
Uh, Thank you, madam. Thank you for the brief but very effective vote of thanks. Once again, before closing, I would like to congratulate both the presenters today. It was a wonderful session. We all gained a lot from the insights that you have presented. And I wish both of you a very bright future. And let it be so that your names come again and again to us in various contexts in the future as well. So thank you for that very interesting session. In fact, before going, I think there is one question again from one of the participants. If you can just take it, it will be fine. Mr. Trushant has a question. What he says is, what is your opinion of the recent Supreme Court order about SOP, Office Memorandum of Violation Project? Sure, what exactly could either of the panelists make out this particular issue? Uh, Unfortunately, I think we couldn't exactly place which Supreme Court order the participant is referring to. Of course, if we are able to get little more details about the particular question, maybe we will be in a position to answer this particular question which has been raised at this moment in time. So thank you once again. Thank you both of you for your excellent presentations, and I wish you all the best for the future. May you have vibrant and brilliant careers ahead for you. And I also thank my co-panelists, Dr. Sindhu P. Nair, Dr. Jalajagumari, Dr. Prasida Unnikrishnan for sparing that time for this very important session. Your contribution to the program has been excellent as always. Thank you, one and all. With this, we bring this particular broadcast to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.